Yashodanandana Vrajajanaranja Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Virajagacharya Raschatarashata Srimad Abhayachana Ravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki. Shri Guru Parampara Ki. Grancha Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. Nitai Gaur Premanandi. English Merry Christmas to English. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita. I have done my part. July 20th, 1977. Abhiram arrived and reported to Srila Prabhupada about Mayapur. There was nothing new in his report. Later, Srila Prabhupada inquired from Tamal Krishna why Abhiram had come. Tamal Krishna explained that Abhiram had decided to take up business but was undecided which city to work in, perhaps Bangalore or Bombay. Later, after Srila Prabhupada had retired for the night and was laying in bed under his mosquito net, he again called for Tamal Krishna. Prabhupada was concerned that Abhiram not drift away from the Krishna consciousness movement on the plea of looking for business. Srila Prabhupada said that he himself had lived independently in Grihastha life, and so had Bhaktivinoda Thakur. But our aim was different, he said. When these neophytes remain aloof from the temple connection without attending the functions, gradually they will be lost. Tamal Krishna replied, for that very reason he had actually suggested to Abhiram that he make his business in Bombay. Actually, said Tamal Krishna, I find the Grihasthas have no desire to live independent of the temples. He explained that in the Bombay temple, the Grihasthas could get apartments near enough to the temple so that they could attend the Mangalarti and other functions. Yes, said Srila Prabhupada, unless these things are continued, the karmi's poison will spoil them. He can do independent business, there is no harm, but he must be connected with devotional service. Srila Prabhupada had not moved his body while talking, but he had turned his head slightly. Now he laid his head on the pillow. Just like Abhiram constructed that house, Prabhupada continued. That's all right, it is within the campus, there is no harm. But if now he goes away after so much training and development, if they are lost, then that's a great loss for the society. With great difficulty we make one Vaishnava, and again if he goes, like Shyama Sundara, then it's a great loss. The whole idea is to give up attachment for the material world and increase attachment for Krishna. That is perfection. Now, according to one's position, it can be done gradually, but this is the aim. Srila Prabhupada told Abhiram that by doing a business in Bombay, he could benefit by living near the temple. Grihastas should not be dependent on the society, he said. At the same time, they should not be independent of the society. Srila Prabhupada laughed at the apparent contradiction. This is the position, he said. Our society cannot take charge of a family. There will be so many numbers of families. How we will support. At the same time, if they remain independent of the society without touch, then the karmi's poison will infect them. Srila Prabhupada concluded that the solution for the Grihastha was either to get an apartment near the temple or live in the temple if possible. They should not live completely independent, he said. That will be future danger. Srila Prabhupada ki. Yeah. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 16, a description of Jambudvip, text 22 to 24. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Okay, so I'll read through the Sanskrit and put translation for verses 22 and 23, and then we can do verse 24 together. Yaschu Mahakadamba Supashva Nirodayastasya Kotarebhyo Vinisrita Panchayama Parinaha Panchamadudara Supashva Sikarat Patantyo Parinatmanam Ilavritam Anamodayanti. Translation. On the side of Supashva mountain stands a big tree called Mahakadamba, which is very celebrated. From the hollows of this tree flow 5 rivers of honey, each about 5 vyamas wide. This flowing honey falls incessantly from the top of Supashva mountain and flows all around Ilavatavasha, beginning from the western side. Thus the whole land is saturated with the pleasing fragrance. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The distance between one hand and another when one spreads both his arms is called a vyama. This comes to about 8 feet. Thus each of the rivers was about 40 feet wide, making a total of about 200 feet. Text 23. Ya yupayanjananam Mukha nivachito vayu samantachatayojanam anavasayati. The air carrying the scent from the mouths of those who drink that honey perfumes the land for 100 yojanas around. Text 24. Evam kamuda nirodoya shatavalsho nama vatastasya skandebhyo Nichina Payodadi Madhugrita Buddha Nadyambara Sayasana Varanadaya Sava Eva Kama Duga Nada Kamudagrat Patantastam Uttarene Lavritam Upayojayanti. Please repeat. Evam. Thus Kamuda Niruddha, having grown on Kamuda mountain, Ya, that Shatavalshanama, the tree named Shatavalsha,
the tree living Shatavalsha,
because of having hundreds of trunks.
because having hundreds of trunks.
Bhatta,
Vata,
a banyan tree.
banyan tree,
Dasya,
Dasya,
of it. Skandevya,
Sandhya,
from the thick branches.
perfect branches.
Nichina,
Nishina,
flowing down.
flowing down.
Paya,
Paya,
milk.
milk.
Dodi,
Adi,
yogurt.
yogurt.
Madhu,
Madhu,
honey.
and honey.
Grita,
Grita,
clarified butter.
clarified
Gouda,
butter.
molasses.
Molasses.
Anna,
Anna,
food grains.
grains.
Adi,
Adi,
and so on.
so on.
Ambara, clothing. Shaya, bedding. Asana, sitting places. Abharana adaya, carrying ornaments and so on. Sarve, everything. Eva, certainly. Kamaduga, fulfilling all desires. Nada, big rivers. Kumuda Agrat, from the top of Kumuda mountain. Atanta, flowing. Tam, to that. Uttarena, on the northern side. Ilavritam, the land known as Ilavritavasha. Upayojayanti, give happiness. Translation. Similarly, on Kumuda mountain there is a great banyan tree, which is called Shatavalsha, because it has 100 main branches. From those branches come many roots, from which many rivers are flowing. These rivers flow down from the top of the mountain to the northern side of Ilavritavasha, for the benefit of those who live there. Because of these flowing rivers, all the people have ample supplies of milk, yogurt, honey, clarified butter, ghee, molasses, food grains, clothes, bedding, sitting places, and ornaments. All the objects they desire are sufficiently supplied for their prosperity, and therefore they are very happy. Purport by Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki. The prosperity of humanity does not depend on a demoniac civilization that has no culture and no knowledge, that has only gigantic skyscrapers and huge automobiles always rushing down the highways. The products of nature are sufficient. When there is a profuse supply of milk, yogurt, honey, food grains, ghee, molasses, dhotis, saris, bedding, sitting places, and ornaments, the residents are actually opulent. When a profuse supply of water from the river inundates the land, all these things can be produced, and there will not be scarcity. This all depends, however, on the performance of sacrifice, as described in the Vedic literature. Anad bhavanti bhutani pajanyadana sambhava, yagyad bhavati pajanyo yagyakama samudbhava. All living bodies subsist on food grains, which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yagya, sacrifice, and yagya is born of prescribed duties. These are the principles given in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 14. If people follow these principles in full Krishna consciousness, human society will be prosperous, and they will be happy both in this life and in the next. Translation again. Similarly, on Kumuda mountain, there is a great banyan tree which is called Shatavalsha, because it has 100 main branches. From those branches come many roots from which many rivers are flowing. These rivers flow down from the top of the mountain to the northern side of Ilavritavasha, for the benefit of those who live there. Because of these flowing rivers, all the people have ample supplies of milk, yogurt, honey, clarified butter, ghee, molasses, food grains, clothes, bedding, sitting places, and ornaments. All the objects they desire are sufficiently supplied for their prosperity, and therefore they are very happy. Amayana Timarandasya Ginanjana Shalakaya Chakshuramitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Tabadakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnamascha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sarvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Shakanditamscha Vanshika Patarubhyascha Kripasanyavyevacha Paritanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Sadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, yesterday I was speaking to Raghunath about how we can maximize the opportunities we have at present with the different volunteers who are wanting to come to Karuna Bhavan to offer their services, specifically in our eco farm, and also about how at present the government, especially the Scottish government, is very keen to promote a sustainable lifestyle based on agricultural produce. And I was kind of playing the devil's advocate a little bit, and also just kind of stirring up the conversation a bit by saying that actually we don't need any money because we have all of the wealth here in the land and in the trees and in the rain and in the minerals and soil and the earth and and the cows. I mean, even though we don't have cows now, but we've got alpacas who are providing us with their nice dung. And I basically said, we don't really need any money. And Raghunath said, well, that's okay for us because we're brahmacharis. I mean, I guess I'm a vanaprastha. But the grihastas need money. But actually throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam on many occasions and also in the Prabhupada Leelamrita, Prabhupada asserts that that is not actually the case. And for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, the occupations of a Vaishya, and Vaishyas are generally grihastas, is described as Krishi Goraksha Varniyam. Which means agriculture, producing food from the land, protecting cows, and engaging in trade. So, I mean, if we look at like Vrindavan, Vrajabhumi, at the time when Krishna was there on the planet, as it's described in the Srimad Bhagavatam and in other Puranas. Then there's very little, in fact, I don't remember any mention anywhere in Krishna's Leela before he goes to Dwarka of any coins, any gold coins or money or anything. But everything, all transactions were done by bartering. Like the gopis would take their milk products to Mathura to barter for some jewelry or perhaps some cooking paraphernalia. Everything that was necessary for their daily life, for looking after the children, looking after the animals, maintaining the buildings, accommodating guests, performing sacrifices, everything that was necessary for every aspect of life, for the brahmacharis, grihastas, vanaprasthas, sannyasis, shudras, vaishyas, kshatriyas and brahmins, everything that was required was available from the land. And there are many parts of Srimad Bhagavatam, both in the original in the original words of Shukadeva and Suta Goswami, as well as in Srila Prabhupada's purports, where he asserts over and over again that everything that we need is in the earth. And so when Srila Prabhupada, as he often does, says that the only reason that there's scarcity is because people are not performing sacrifice, then we may think then, well, how is it that in ISKCON, where we're performing a lot of sacrifice, in the sense of we're performing the holy name, chanting the holy name, Sankirtan, distributing Srimad Bhagavatam, as well as worshipping the deities and performing and we're also doing other yagyas as well. So we're like following all of the rules and regulations regarding how to perform sacrifice. But how is it that within ISKCON people have to go out and get a job. And as we were reading in Leelamrita, Srila Prabhupada didn't want the devotees to have to go and get a job. Shudras are not meant to have money. It's only the Vaishyas that are meant to have a means of exchange to be able to perform trade. So, so the Vaishyas could have some form of exchange because the Krishi Goraksha Vaniyam means trade, banking, commerce. And the purpose of that is to enable them to obtain things which are not available by bartering. So certain things were not even available in Vedic times by bartering. For example, the Kshatriyas had to protect the whole society, sometimes against demoniac forces. So they needed to be able to access resources in an emergency. So they had to be able to give, a large amount of wealth to perhaps a sort of prince in their kingdom, to persuade that prince to give their army to the emperor so they could fight against another dynasty, just like in the Kurukshetra. We don't hear anything in Kurukshetra about how so many armies came to fight, but there were gold coins in the Kshatriya society, so that people could, in an emergency, be given enough wealth to convince them to give their services. It wouldn't be practical to say, okay, we need you to come and fight now. Here's 10 million cows. Because if it's a battle situation, they don't want to be having 10 million cows because they won't be able to look after them. So they need something that they can put in the bank for the future. I don't know if anybody really knows how banking and trade went on in Kshatriya society in Vedic times, whether it was by gold or whether it was just by faith and alliances. Indradyumna Maharaj, in his recent series of podcasts about the Govindaji deity, who was originally installed by Rupa Goswami in Vrindavan and then travelled over a long period of time to Jaipur. And he talks about how the Rajput kings had alliances even with the Mughals. And some of that alliance was based on wealth, but some of it was just based on trust and on intermarriage as well. So exactly how the Vaishyas conducted their finance and their banking, we don't actually know. I would suspect that they would be able to do it without money. They didn't want to do it. Money was the last resort. Because it doesn't really, although gold has some value because it can be used, it's a precious metal, and diamonds and jewels, they also have value, not just in their decorative value for making nice rings and ornaments, but gold, as we know now, is a very special metal which has value in computer science because it's so pure it can't be contaminated by different elements. That's the special thing. One of the special qualities of gold is its purity. You can wear a gold ring for years and not have to clean it, and it still remains shiny. Gold also has another quality, which is it's the most ductile of all metals, which is why it can be used as gold leaf to decorate a temple. You could probably decorate that whole altar just with about that much gold, because you can knock it into so fine that you may only need maybe 10,000 pounds to decorate that altar with gold. And it can also be 1 ounce of gold can be drawn out into a thread more than a mile long. So that's why they can use gold. That's why you can have a sari made from gold. It's just made with gold thread. So it has a lot of value apart from its apart from its value just as currency. So for that reason, it's a very precious metal which can be condensed into a small coin and given to someone. But as I say, apart from gold, all of the currency, paper currency and like cryptocurrency and all kinds of online credit currency, it has no real value. And rather than have value, it's quite the opposite. It actually creates fear and it creates dependence on a demoniac society. Just as Srila Prabhupada says, it means that business people become infected by the karmi's poison, and there's nothing more poisonous than debt, especially when that debt is managed by demoniac banks and demoniac, loan sharks. I mean, like a loan shark makes it sound like, it's some like really dodgy guy selling like like my mother used to say that during the Second World War, the really dodgy spivs, they were called, who were the black marketeers, they would sell ladies' tights because ladies' tights were rationed during the war. So like loan sharks are kind of thought of as being like very nasty, exploitative people. But actually Srila Prabhupada understood that the whole of the Western capitalist and the communist systems were all, just kind of like glorified loan sharks who'd learned how to exploit people. And the way they do that was by making money seem extremely attractive. That if you get, it's like they give the poor workers, I mean, not just the poor workers, but even the professionals, they give them this kind of false conception that if you can get enough money in your bank account, you'll be protected against all possible dangers in life. But it's just a complete illusion. The more money you have in the bank account, that means the more you're controlled, the less you're able just to get up and go when there's a threat. So when, like, for example, when Maharaj Nanda it was actually Maharaj Nanda's brothers, Upananda and Abhinanda and Sunanda, they convinced Maharaj Nanda that it was too dangerous to stay in Gokula and that they should go and move to Nanda or Vrindavan. And so in one day, the entire community of Nanda's Vaishyas and Shudras and all of the gopis and the gopas and all of the cows, all of the mothers, they all got on their bullock carts and they left Gokula, went across the Jamuna, and in one day they were in Chatikar, camped outside of Vrindavan, ready to start their new home. So they weren't thinking, I have to sell my house. I'm going to just think of all the money I'm going to lose. But that house I've worked my whole life for that house. It's worth like it's worth £200,000. Just think, how am I going to be able to support my children without any money? No, they just got all of their household paraphernalia, all their pots and pans, and all of their clothes, and all of their whatever else they seemed was necessary. And they just abandoned Gokula and moved to Vrindavan in one day. So if we want to be tied down for years to an unprosperous, poisonous, dangerous place, and be in total anxiety about how we're going to look after our grihastas and look after our children, and look after our future generations, then we can continue to worry about where the money's going to come from. But if we actually want to create a society which is truly prosperous based on Varnashram principles and which will enable all sections of our community to really see Krishna everywhere, because all of the instructions on how to establish Varnashram are there in Krishna's words in or in the words of Krishna's acharyas. So we'll constantly be practicing devotional service to establish that very simple society that's just based on the wealth of the land. And the wealth of the land, and actually there's an amazing verse actually. I was kind of, one thing that we're blessed with, which you may say we couldn't have without money, is the internet. Because it enables us to search the Shastras for relevant information very, very quickly. So while we have that opulence of being able to do that, in the future we won't need that, because we'll have Brahmins trained up in every different branch of the Vedic science, just like Krishna and Balaram went to the school of Sandipani Muni, and they learned all of the different 64 arts and sciences, and that was standard for standard for children in those days. And even now, there are still gurukuls where children, both boys and girls, actually learn those 64 arts, or at least a lot of them anyway. And then they'll specialize in them. So then all the knowledge required for establishing an agrarian varnashram society will eventually be there in people without the need for the internet. But anyway, so as I said, there's lots of places in Srila Prabhupada's books where Srila Prabhupada said that all we need is to perform sacrifice, but we can't actually gain the results of sacrifice unless we learn how to extract the nectar which is there in the earth. And Maharaj Prithu, having chastised the earth planet for withdrawing her wealth, then he was very, very angry because Bhumidev, because she'd been exploited by the ravages of King Vena, who was the king before Maharaj Prithu, who was very demoniac, atheistic, and he promoted all sorts of nefarious activities in the kingdom. So Bhumidev, she withdrew her wealth of her natural, minerals and plants, so that demoniac kingdom wouldn't be so powerful. And then even after Maharaj Prithu took responsibility for the earth, even then she wasn't inclined to actually give her produce. So Maharaj Prithu chastised her for being disobedient, and she explained to Maharaj Prithu why she'd been disobedient. So she says here, Purashishta yosha dayo Brahmanaya vishampate bhujyamana maya drishta asadbhya drita vratai. My dear King Prithu, the seeds, roots, herbs and grains which were created by Lord Brahma in the past are now being used by non-devotees who are devoid of all spiritual understanding. My dear King, not only are grains and herbs being used by non-devotees, but as far as I am concerned, I am not being properly maintained. Indeed, I am being neglected by kings who are not punishing these rascals who have turned into thieves by using grains for sense gratification. Consequently, I have hidden all these seeds, which were meant for the performance of sacrifice. Due to being stocked for a very long time, all the grain seeds within me have certainly deteriorated. Therefore, you should immediately arrange to take these seeds out by the standard process, which is recommended by the acharyas or shastras. O great hero, protector of living entities, if you desire to relieve the living entities by supplying them for sufficient grain, And if you desire to nourish them by taking milk from me, you should make arrangements to bring a calf suitable for this purpose, and a pot in which the milk can be kept, as well as a milkman to do the work. Since I will be very much affectionate towards my calf, your desire to take milk from me will be fulfilled. So here, Mother Earth, she has a kind of dual identity as the Earth planet, and also as a cow, and she's telling us that basically the process for obtaining all that we need from the earth is the same as the process of obtaining all that we need from the cow. And for us to be able to do so, then we need to study Shastra to understand what are the qualifications of a milkman, and what kind of pot do we need to collect the milk in, and how do we create an environment in which the cow can have like faith that the calf is being cared for. So similarly, in this section and in the subsequent verses, Srila Prabhupada explains that as well as performing yajna in the form of Harinam Sankirtan and other yajnas as and when necessary, according to the directions of Shastra and according to the directions of our spiritual masters, as well as performing sacrifice, and we also need to become expert in the knowledge of how to extract the nectar which comes from that sacrifice. And that means how to milk the earth of all of the nutrition and of all of the raw materials that are within the earth. So in this purport to this verse, this is chapter 4, Canto 4, chapter 18, text 9 and 10. Srila Prabhupada says, just as a cow cannot deliver sufficient milk without being affectionate to her calf, the earth cannot produce sufficient necessities without feeling affection for those who are Krishna conscious. Even though the earth's being in the shape of a cow may be taken figuratively, the meaning herein is very explicit. Just as a calf can derive milk from a cow, all living entities, including animals, birds, bees, reptiles, aquatics, and ISKCON grihastas, can receive their respective foods from the planet Earth, provided that human beings are not asat or adrita vrat, which means unclean vow, provided that human beings are not in ignorance of the Vedic literature, and they haven't taken an unclean vow, adrita vrat. An unclean vow means to make a kind of, may not be fully conscious, but to make a kind of resolution that I'm going to get what I need for myself and my family, and whatever it takes, even if I have to exploit other animals, even if I have to break the regulative principles, even if I have to go and get a job and get a bank account and rely on, the karma's poison for my well-being. That's an unclean vow. When human society becomes asat or ungodly or devoid of Krishna consciousness, the entire world suffers. Okay, I'll stop there if there are any questions or comments.
I'll switch you fast. It's interesting that when you take a vow is to become committed so that you push through anything. It's interesting that to consistently perform sinful activity, you have to commit to that. And they say that in advertising, meat eating, intoxication, illicit sex are all promoted because of, naturally, like country people, they wouldn't be inclined to want to do that. So to sustain the vow, they need consistent encouragement. So it's interesting, isn't it, that they kind of are going to commitment to do these activities, then it has to be proactively sustained for them. So it would indicate that people were removed from their environment and just put back into a more simple agrarian situation. And they weren't being advertised to, they would naturally give up those vows.
Yeah. Yeah. We were talking a little bit about warfare. Warfare warfare is just caused by passionate people getting too much affected by the mode of passion. And when it's often throughout the Bhagavatam, when the Kshatriyas, when the kings get too proud and stop taking the advice of the Brahmins, then their lower nature comes out and they become more and more dependent on irreligious activities for their prosperity. And when they do that, then they come in conflict with other kings. Then it's seen as being, Srila Prabhupada describes it as nepotism. The best example is Maharaj Prachina Bhaishat, who was actually a very, very pious devotee, but just due to excessive affection for his own family, he performed really horrendous activities just to protect his family, and he started performing yagyas just for the purpose of satisfying his family members. And obviously, when someone does that, then neighboring Kshatriyas feel threatened. That if he's not going to get what he needs, perhaps he's going to come and invade us, and which often they do, of course. So we, for many, many years, actually, ever since I started reading the Srimad Bhagavatam and started reading Srila Prabhupada's books, I'd never had faith in certain statements that Srila Prabhupada made. And one statement was that in the past, the Muslims and the Hindus, they were all living in harmony. The Chinese and the Indians, they were all living peacefully. And all of the agitation is just stirred up by political leaders who are trying to agitate to suppress the ignorant masses. And I never really accepted that, just because of my limited knowledge of history, and because I suppose I'd learned history from, in one sense, the paradigm or the agenda of the colonial British ruling classes, their version of history. And if you read their version of history, it's all about warfare. And during warfare, at least in Europe, at least within Europe in the last 200 years or so anyway, then the majority of the people who suffered were the Sudras and the women and the children, and millions and millions of people were tortured and suffered and starved and thrown out of their countries, thrown out of their homes, their cities destroyed, as we still see now. So I just didn't really accept that. But just studying these verses and these purports just today and yesterday, and also reading a little bit about how rural communities throughout the world are now sharing their knowledge and regenerating their wealth through knowledge of how to extract the natural treasures of the earth, then actually I can see that actually it was possible, because if a Kshatriya king invaded a country, then a new country or a new territory, then they would need the resources of the earth. They would need food, they would need clothing, they would need wood to build chariots, wood to build houses, they'd need metals to, to make tools. And all of that knowledge was in the hands of the Shudras and the Vaishyas and the farmers. So they didn't kill the citizens because they needed them. But now nobody needs, now they don't need us because we haven't got anything of any use. What use? Why we're of no value to an aggressive corporation or an aggressive country that wants to steal our wealth. We've got nothing to offer them. So if we really want to protect ourselves, protect our communities, and protect the next generations, then we need to learn how to live without money, without depending on those people who control our lives for their interest, not for our interest. I found so many quotes, and I tried to write them down. And let me see, I'm sure there's one. Here it is, page 65.
It's interesting how you were mentioning about debt. So money is a very good way to most people in debt, and then they're enslaved in the system. They can't just walk away.
Yeah. Actually, it's more that example of Nanda Maharaj just gathering all of the residents of Gokul and taking them to Vrindavan. There's a more recent example again, which Indrajit Maharaj spoke about in his podcasts about Radha Govindaji, and that is that the kings of Jaipur, they were very much devoted to Lord Govinda. A long time before Govindaji came to Jaipur, they were constantly trying to protect Govindaji because Govindaji was hid in about 10 different towns on the journey between Vrindavan and Jaipur. First, Govindaji was hidden in Radhakund, and then in Kamyavan, and then it was a place called Govindapur, and there was like a few other villages in Rajasthan. And eventually, Man Singh or Jai Singh decided he was going to build a city for Govindaji. So Jaipur didn't exist at that time. He built the whole city of Jaipur just for Govindaji. And then once the city was completed, while the city was being built, he kept Govindaji in his own palace and worshipped him personally. And then when the city was completed, he brought his entire kingdom to Jaipur from the previous city. They just abandoned the previous city and just all moved to Jaipur.
What would have been a giveaway is they were trying to find Govinda, they found a place called Govindapur, and they found something there.
But if we couldn't offer that protection to Sri Kodnatai Mai Prashashi now, we couldn't do that. If we were being attacked, if Mr. Putin decided to come march into Scotland because we weren't very well protected and he needed a kind of foothold in Europe or something, where would we hide our deities? And how could we survive without, the universal credit, or how could we survive? I mean, there are people who could survive. Yeah.
Forward this principle of complete self-sufficiency and not depending on the outside world. I think it's important in the light of this presentation also to explain that there is a transition period towards that. One thing is there is a transition period. Second thing, that some people will never be able to live like that, and probably the majority, even of members of our organization, maybe struggling to make that transition, especially like a newcomers, and so this kind of goal that you're explaining It may take even a few generations to reach. It may not be, but it may happen. And if I would challenge you to live without money, without tomorrow, from tomorrow, I think you would have a great difficulty.
Well, we've been living like the last 30 years.
Well, you're living.
I don't have any money.
You have a computer. You're living in a house that the bills are being paid by the money, by someone else who is struggling to earn the money, and also the food on your table also is bought with the money, and the glasses they're wearing is with the money, and the clothes are with the money, and the books are printed with the money that is in your hands, the computer and the internet, everything is.
No, it's not really. It's just bought with trust.
It's
bought with trust. It's not bought with money, actually. Money is just an exchange that is accepted in our society as like trust, and it's a way. It's actually love that's paying for me for my sustenance. It's the love of the community members here, and it's the trust of the government. The government trusts that we are like good people, and therefore they allow us to have these resources. They don't need. They could give us these resources without money. The government can. A government of a country has the legal right to exert taxes from the citizens. So actually, if you read about the history of Les Hegel, you'll find that about 500 years ago, taxes were paid in barley, or in some kind of food grains.
No, it's all fine. Still, I'm saying that there is a transition period in the that we said we are using now, that there is trust, and we're using the paper, there's an exchange, and etc. With all this money, we can call it trust. Still, for example, for us to not use money from tomorrow, you would need a forest here and the wood processing system that we can heat all the buildings. We need a solution for lighting. We need quite a bit of people who can work on the land and produce all the food and etc. And a part of that, you need people who are very detached and austere that would be prepared to live that kind of lifestyle without what the money is offering now. Also to build the houses, from this expertise and the skills and all that kind of thing. So if you're making presentation of class like this, we need to explain about transition period that could take us there. So like an Amish, they're already living like that, for a good few generations. But at the same time, they're expanding, not so, it's increasing, I think, but not to the extent they are not trying to outreach and bring more and more people, but the people who come because they're attracted to the lifestyle of theirs and they're kind of fed up with the modern society. But our mission as well is to share, and also, in one sense, people who would never live in that community, they still can go back to Godhead, and a lot of them, they would never move to that kind of community, but we want to set an example and to demonstrate that it is possible and it is the best way of living. And so like that, so there's a good transition period that will make it happen. And there are many premises that it has too many tips, has to be made, and a lot of money has to be invested to reach that point, because you will need to buy a land, you will need to buy the forest, or maybe somebody will give you as a donation, but somebody will have to pay for it. So I hope it's not coming too much of like a challenge to all what you said, because I think you explained very nicely the goal of self-sufficiency, and that a lot of actually communities around the world are aiming for, but it will take a bit of time and quite a bit of investment to reach that point.
Yeah, thank you very much. I agree with you. And but actually, I don't know if you listened to the conversation between Jainatai and Sri Ramaraj yesterday. So he basically said that transition starts with talking about the goal, and also like removing the kind of intellectual objections to the goal. Like, so I'm talking about it to like encourage myself and others that it is possible, and that when we hear arguments, or what you might call denial, or just kind of counter arguments, then we shouldn't allow those counter arguments to dull our enthusiasm. But at the same time, we should take them as constructive criticism, in the sense, there needs to be a transition period. But as you say, I still assert that money is not necessary. Nevertheless, I'll still say that we don't need money. But I'm not.
From tomorrow, or
no, from right now, this moment, right now.
Okay, so I'd like you to challenge to demonstrate that.
Okay, well, I will do. I will do. Okay, well, and it's after 8:30 now, so I don't know if.
This can be
Grancha Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Shri Kodanatai Mai Purusha ki, Nitai Gaura Premanandi, Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda ki.